Hi YouTube. Yes, you can build a full stack SaaS application using AI, and in this video I'm going to be breaking down all of the lessons I learned building Kernel, the app that you're seeing on the screen. So we're going to dive straight in because there's around 7 lessons that I want to share from using AI pretty much for the last 3 or 4 months as I built Kernel. So before I get into the lessons, I do want to share a little bit of background and context to me because I think it's important to understand where my skill sets come from and how that may be different for who you are or the skill set that you have. So I did learn to code approximately 3 to 5 years ago, but I never intended to work as a developer. Pretty much I did that because I'd launched and I have also sold a couple of startups in the past, a number of which were SaaS applications, and I'd always worked with other developers but felt the need to learn how to code myself for a variety of reasons. First of all, to be able to communicate with them better. Second of all, to take on some of the work myself and accelerate our development timeframe. That said, I hadn't written any code for about 12 to 18 months prior to building the application that you saw on the screen before with Kernel. As I said, I never intended to work as a developer, so I would say that my current skill set, with a little bit of polishing up on some things, dedicating maybe 3 or 4 weeks to kind of get up to speed again, would be that of a junior developer. I wouldn't be able to write code, but I need a lot of hand holding along the way. So keep that in mind as you watch these lessons. If you're coming from a background that's more experienced or less experienced, it's important context. So first of all, I think the number one lesson that I want to share is that yes, 100% you can build a full stack SaaS application with AI. I've proven it. It's live. You can go to getkernel.co, create an account, and it has a lot of different functionality. All of the typical CRUD, create, read, update, delete functionality, but also some more complex logic that ties certain things together. So this isn't just like a simple task management application that just does one thing. It is an app that is live, and I intend to use it and obviously hope to market and sell it as well. That said, no, you cannot do it in 10 minutes. This is the absolute, bane of my existence. I am very deep into keeping up to date with trends, and I absolutely hate these type of videos that just proliferate on YouTube and in comments on Reddit. I have blurred out the last name there because I didn't want to pick on anyone in particular, but the usual types of videos that these are. My view is that a lot of these videos and a lot of this positioning is equivalent to kind of like what was happening a number of years ago with drop shipping or creating blogs to do affiliate stuff. They're selling this dream that you can do something with only minutes and make tens of thousands of dollars. It's just not the case, and I'll get into some more of the detail as to why. So why can't you do it? Well, first of all, a lot of these videos show someone creating some very simple application in 10 minutes, but often that video is very highly edited. So they take out a lot of the thought process, the back and forward, or even if they don't, it's still just a very simple application that has very little chance of actually being scalable, let alone saleable. In a lot of these videos, they often do it without a database, so they use something, whether it's Claude or ChatGPT Direct or using V0, Lovable, etc. to create, let's just say, a task management application, and all of the logic is just on the front end. You can create a task, it looks like a task has been created, but it's not saved anywhere. If it does have a database, still the application is very rudimentary. It is not something that you can just go and deploy and sell. Sure, you might be able to use that application, for yourself if you just run it on your local machine. But I think what's missing in a lot of these videos, and it's what's missing with a lot of the context around this, is that even a very simple, or what appears on face value as a very simple capability in an application, for example, creating a task, can have a lot more complexity to it that AI won't take account of if you just give it a 1 or 2 sentence prompt. I could open up ChatGPT or Claude right now and say, hey, I want to build an application using Node.js on the backend, React on the front end. I want to allow a user to create a task, and it will probably do it, and it will probably work with not too much effort. But if we take that example, let's just say you're creating a task. What about all the other business logic around it? If it's an application that you're selling to a team, who can create a task? Can anyone create a task? Okay, if anyone can create a task, who can edit the task? Can anyone in the team edit the task, or only the person who created the task? Who can delete a task? If you delete a task, what happens to attachments that might be on the task? Did you even think about allowing attachments to the task? When you also create a task, how do you make sure it's only seen by the right people? Can everyone in the organization see it, or can you only see it if you're the person who created it? Like, these are just some of the kind of very high level edge cases, but certain things that you need to think about when you're creating an application. And just watching these videos where people spit out, go and build a task management app, or go and build this, it's not really showing the full depth of the experience that you would need to support in an application. So that brings me to the next lesson, and after all of my experience working with AI, I definitely feel that it helps having some coding experience. It allows you to prompt better. It allows you to identify when AI might be going wrong. And the reason why I share that is, as I said, like my background, I'd kind of peg it at that junior developer level. I don't know all of the edge cases. I'm not really fast at writing a lot of code. but I can read it, I can understand in most cases what it's trying to do, and when I get stuck, I know how to work with AI to get it to explain it to me better or understand the edge cases that it might have forgotten about. So in a way, I think AI is exceptionally well suited to people just like me, people who aren't, seasoned software developers with 10 years experience working for large, companies. They're people who know a little bit, but they need some hand holding along the way. So my recommendation would be, if you are someone with no coding experience whatsoever and you want to use AI, honestly, go and do a 15 or 20 hour course on Udemy. That's how I got started. I know it seems like a lot of investment up front, 15, 20 hours, you're crazy. Like I did numerous courses, many, many hours more than that. But if you go and do that in the language and the frameworks that are of interest to you, whether that's Node.js on the back end, React, or whatever it is, you're at least going to understand how the code is meant to work. Again, at a high level, because these courses don't go super in depth all the time, but you're going to be in a much, much, much better starting point. Now, the next best thing to, that should be next best, not the best. The next best thing to coding experience, though, is having the ability to clearly articulate the business logic you want your application to achieve. If we jump back to that task example, merely asking AI to create a task, allow someone to be able to create a task in your application, it's going to do it, but it's going to be very high level. So can you think through that problem and go, hey, I have a task management application. With this application, there's a company with many users. I want to allow any user to be able to create a task, but when a user creates a task, only the person who created the task can edit the task or delete the task. Whatever the logic is that you want to encapsulate, being able to articulate that clearly to AI is 100% very useful. All right, so getting a little bit more actionable, Claude is still 100% my preference over ChatGPT. I have paid subscriptions to both Claude and ChatGPT. I actually had a paid subscription to ChatGPT before Claude, but in my personal experience, Claude just writes better code. It just does. Time and time again. I think one of the best capabilities in Claude is actually its projects capability. You can upload a huge amount of files, and it really helps Claude understand the context a lot better of your project. In ChatGPT, you can only upload 20 files. It's absolutely crazy. I have no idea why they have such a strict limit on this when Claude can get away with a lot more. That said, I still do use ChatGPT for coding, but it's a lot more. It's normally if I run out of message, Claude has a much stricter message limit. So if I run out of a limit on, run into limits on Claude, I often jump over to ChatGPT, but I won't necessarily try and get ChatGPT to build a brand new piece of functionality. It's more like troubleshooting some of the issues that I have, or if Claude does get stuck in a rabbit hole, and it does at times, sometimes jumping over and trying to get ChatGPT to give it a second opinion, just like you would go to like another colleague if you and your first colleague couldn't figure it out. That said, I have also used a lot of the other tools like V0 and Bolt.new, etc., more for the front end, and I've got a comment coming up about that. The last thing I would say is I know people use things like Cursor. I've used it, I've tried it. I still prefer just to have that chat interface and have the code provided back to me, and then I manually cut and paste. I just feel that I get more context. I can read a lot better. I understand what's happening a lot better. That's just a personal opinion. Other people may differ on that. All right, so that brings me to my next lesson, and I feel AI is better at back end than front end. I'm not 100% sure why. I feel that perhaps, in certain situations, because backend is more logic driven, there's less scope for it to kind of go off the rails or think about things in a different way. That said, V0, Bolt, Lovable, they're great for the UI. They're great for either experimenting with what you might want the UI to look like and for creating, the UI components and elements, often using ShadCN behind the scenes. But where I think some of these tools struggle is the logic between the front end and the back end in a couple of particular areas. First of all, I'm using 10-stack query in my project. Often, if you are creating the front end with these tools, it won't consider things really fully about like invalidating queries. If you're not sure what that means, is imagine in my application you've got 20 notes, you add a new note, it'll invalidate the whole query, so it goes and fetches all of the notes again, and that can be like a little bit of a performance issue. It's not the best user experience. So it's kind of that, it's great at the UI elements, but the logic around how we fetch or how we interact with data can sometimes be a little bit lacking. Same thing with parsing props and structuring components. So either it does one of two things. One, it just makes one massive component, and that's great because all the code's there. But if you then have to do anything, it's huge. And I've still got some refactoring to do in my own project where I want to break up some of these large components into more easily consumable components. Or if it goes the other way and it does break it up, the level of passing props down multiple levels can get a little bit cumbersome, and sometimes it isn't aware of some of the functionality, again, in 10-stack query, where you might not necessarily need to do that all the time. There are also often clashes with some of the stuff on the front end where the project's not fully aware of everything that's happening. So what I mean by that is modal is a great example. So when a modal overlays, I spent many an hour trying to work with the components that were created, and they would overlay and display correctly, but then if you had some level of additional interaction on that modal, in my case it was then rendering a calendar widget, it just could not figure out how to stop clicking on the calendar modal. Like the click would go through the calendar modal onto the modal itself, or close down the modal, all these kinds of issues. And it's just an example, I think, where you then have, similar to the backend, sometimes if you have multiple files with multiple relationships and dependencies, it gets confused, and I see that a lot more on the front end. Another example is it sometimes is not aware of new documentation. So with 10-stack query, there was a bug that I had to go back to the documentation because it was trying to use an isLoading value, but it doesn't exist anymore. It is pending. All right. So that leads me to my next kind of core piece, and I've done a video on this before, and I'll link down to that below. It might go into it in a little bit more detail, but I call it a flat approach to feature development. This diagram is presented from a back-end point of view, and that's where I've used this kind of structure most, but I do want to use it more on the front end. What we're looking at is what I would call a fairly typical structure of a Node.js, Express.js application, where on the left-hand side you can see you've got a routes folder, controllers, services, and then you have each of the specific files in those. So for example, task.routes, add task.routes, controller, task, add task, etc. So you've got these different folders where you have different functionality in each of them, and it's kind of the functionality is you differentiate in the file name, right? So your route to call your controller has to go into the controller folder, the controller has to go into the services folder, but then also within that, for example, like the task.services.js, that might have functions related to a lot of different things that you are doing with tasks in your application, right? In addition to that, you have utils, middleware, validations, etc., and you end up with this structure where you kind of have a user request that comes in, hits the route, obviously, it goes through maybe middleware, it might go to a controller, it might call it a service that's off to a side, and then it might call something like a notification service to send an email, and these are all designed to be obviously highly reusable, which is beneficial because you don't want to have to write code a lot, but it just increases the complexity and the footprint, I guess is a good word, of what AI needs to be aware of to get something done. And in addition to that, you have this test file, especially if you're doing integration tests, that then needs to span like basically the entire stack of your application. So if you ask AI to make a change, and one of those changes touches the notification service, it might change it to fix the problem that you have for that particular use case, but it forgets that the notification service is also used by this other this other controller or service over here. So instead, what I try and do is have this flatter structure where I have a components folder, and within that a specific folder for the functionality that I'm developing. So for example, get tasks. And then within that, I have all of the functionality associated with getting a task. So getting a task route, getting a task controller, the services, what I call utils, or like functions associated with getting a task that the services file can call, validations, etc. And then you have another folder for things like adding a task. Now, the benefit of this is it becomes much flatter. Everything that you need, so if you need to feed AI, hey, I need to make an update to my get task functionality, essentially 85-90% of it should be in that folder. Obviously, you're still going to have some middleware or some global utilities like authentication and error handling, but as much as possible, I try and kind of really chunk it down and keep it within that, that defined folder for that particular piece of functionality. Same thing with the test, because then it does make it a bit easier for the tests to be fully aware of what's happening. The downside of this approach is that it does lead to some level of duplication and writing more code. For example, you might have a function to verify that a user is able to do something with a task. That function might be useful for both get tasks and add tasks, right? Checking permissions or something. In this approach, you basically have to write that code twice. It's obviously a small amount of code, but you have to write twice. And then if you change it, you have to node change it in a couple of different places. So that's kind of where I'm at with my thinking. That's how I approach it, and I found it very beneficial, especially for the back end, and that's how I'm continuing to work with AI and coding. And finally, that brings me to my last point. AI is just generally bad at integration tests. If you've watched my video series when I've been building out kernel, you'll see that there was a couple of videos where I was spending hours and hours and hours just trying to write tests, trying to get them to work. And really, it comes back to the fact that the more files, the more relationships you have to manage, and integration tests in particular really struggle with that because there's lots of interrelated dependencies that it's hard for AI just to understand, or at least keep in memory, all of the context of all of these different things. It is better at unit tests, although it's still not perfect. And to be honest, I still don't really have the answer on how to get AI to write the best possible tests for you. I think in part it starts with getting your unit tests as solid as possible, and then that way, hopefully your footprint of where things can go wrong is less. But working on integration tests is still something that I'm figuring out with AI to get it working quicker than what it would. I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, it's like if you can write integration tests quicker than AI is not helpful. And with the amount of issues that AI has trying to write these integration tests, sometimes I think it probably would be quicker to do them yourself. That said, I am not as experienced with writing tests. I have done it for a couple of projects that I've launched in the past, and I did get it to work without the help of AI. But yeah, AI just, it struggles. If someone out there has a lot of experience using AI to write integration tests, I'd love to hear from you, so comment down below. And that basically brings us to the end of this video. All of the lessons I've learned building full stack SaaS app with AI. If you've stuck around, I'd love for you to comment down below. Let me know what you think and let me know where you've used AI or where AI has been helpful to you and how you're coding with it. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.